Okay, this segment is one I've looked forward to, and Michael, what we're going to do is really try to pull apart the creative cycle and maybe use a couple of examples. So let's take it from here.
Yeah, in the previous cycle we talked about how historically scientists had identified specific types of activities that they recognized that they did repeatedly when they were going through a creative process. And they had identified initiation, the start out stage, this saturation stage when you're pulling in information and research.
Before you make a decision.
Right. It's also, I should point out, it's the skill building. It's when you have to build specific skills that are necessary for the...
So within the saturation there is understanding the what you've gathered. You may have to get some skills and know how to use them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's an important part. They talked about incubation, illumination, and verification. We've added two additional phases, one after the saturation phase.
Okay.
Once you've gathered all of this information, and we've referenced this in other segments when we talked about convergence and divergence. So the saturation is this convergence. You're bringing as many different pieces of information together and sort of building this huge mound of potential to think about and building up concepts that you have about it. But then there is a manipulation stage. It's this important stage where you start playing with the ideas.
And when you came up with that years ago and suggested, you placed it before incubation. Why did you do that?
Because I think incubation is a very important stage, but people tend to misunderstand it, or when people write about it, it takes on this sort of magical quality.
That it happened suddenly.
Yeah, that it
genius.
Happens. Right. You know, somebody was just walking along and out of the blue, you know, after taking a bath, they had this brilliant idea and they solved a problem. But it's like, well, what problem was it that they solved? You have to have a problem first. You have to have the initiation stage. You have to go through the saturation stage of pulling in information and thinking about it. You have to manipulate it. You know, all of this work has to happen, or at least be primed in the conscious brain so that the unconscious brain knows what it's working on.
Okay, so go through that one stage again that you placed before illumination and after saturation.
Yeah. It's really the manipulation stage.
Okay.
And frequently, it's odd that this was not identified as a phase, because when people think of creativity, this is really what they think of. They think of, you know, playing with things.
No, I'll disagree. I think the creativity that focuses the attention of the public is that stroke of insight, that one moment. And there's a perception that it came like lightning out of the blue. Well, it didn't. It might have been 5 years worth of these first 3 or 4 stages of saying, okay, I can't figure it out, the pieces don't seem to fit, and then suddenly that one piece seems to fit. Well, it took years maybe to get the other pieces in place through what you're calling the manipulation stage.
Right.
You have to throw out some pieces that don't fit, the others that didn't belong in this puzzle, but the ones that are there don't quite fit, and then that immediate excitement might then make you forget the days, weeks, months, or years of moving them around. It just didn't work. Okay.
Right. Yeah, you got to write an essay, so you start, you know, you figure out what the subject is, you start gathering bits of research and bits of information, and they're almost like little on index cards.
We've been there.
Yeah, we've all been there, and then it's a process of moving the index cards around, and you know,
and then the night before the final is due, you're sleeping and you're, now I've got it, and it goes together.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Right. Yeah, so that's the manipulation stage.
And then after the illumination, which was pointed out years ago, then what's the second one you put in?
Implementation.
Okay.
An implementation stage. People had identified this verification stage, but there's something missing between illumination. It's like, I've got this great idea, and verifying it. Well, you have to actually get the idea out of your brain.
Into at least a prototype.
Yeah, or at least an articulation, you know, of the idea. You have to draw a picture of what it is. You have to say it in words.
Well, let me go a little bit technical. You can't apply for a patent for a great idea unless you can actually draw it out and figure out and tell someone else in writing the patent office, this is what I believe this would do. You don't need to make a prototype, but you have to be able to explain it. So is that the type of thing you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a great idea in your brain, it's a certain, suddenly connections of this firing in a particular pattern, a particular sequence come together, and your reward systems are telling you, that's the one, that's it, I love it.
You're flooded with excitement, with dopamine, serotonin. You want to go out and run naked and shout eureka.
Right.
But at that point, you really haven't got something that's been verified, and you don't have something that's actually...
Well, you don't have anything that you can verify. You have to make it manifest before you can
even
actually
test it.
Verify it. So, and that's an entirely different cognitive, set of cognitive functions. And that's an important point about this whole creative cycle when it comes back to brain health.
Okay.
Is that when you go through each of these different steps of the creative cycle, you are using very different sets of cognitive functions. Each phase requires a different type of cognitive activity. And some of them, you're actually turning up one set of cognitive abilities, you're turning down another. You're modulating, because if you're a musician and you're doing playing music from a composition, if you're reading music, that takes a very different part of the brain than if you're improvising.
Okay.
Just sort of.
And we know that now, not just in speculation.
Right.
How?
Charles Lamb, out of Johns Hopkins University, did some wonderful research. Got a demagnetized piano that he could have musicians lying in an fMRI.
You followed that one closely, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, he was there. I got him to speak at an event in Maryland, and so got to know him.
Yeah, and when you worked with him, that was several years ago, and that was when improv and music and fMRIs were just getting together. And in fact, there's This Is Your Brain on Improv is something that you've done some lectures and talks on that. But improv isn't the domain only of musicians.
No.
And I'm going to now let me finish, then I've got an idea to throw an example to you. So go ahead and wind up.
All right. The point that I was making about, from a brain health point of view, we've talked about mental stimulation, all of the cogwheels. What we need is a combinatorial approach. We need to be hitting all of the different aspects. So that applies to your cognitive abilities as well. You can't just hammer away at one cognitive ability and expect your whole brain to be exercised and strengthened. One of the reasons that we promote creativity so much when you do a serious creative cycle is you're going through all of these different phases that require you to use different parts of the brain, and you're exercising all of the different parts of the brain and figuring out how they.
And there's also a time element that if someone is looking at brain exercise as a puzzle, as long as it's challenging and novel, the number of minutes that you're doing it is critical, that you're paying attention. I've always said that if you have a crossword expert who can do a crossword puzzle for 10 minutes and it takes you 45, who gets a better brain exercise? The one who spends the time enjoying what they're doing. So we've got the cycle then built. We've got to the verification. But what if you have reason to go back? Can you go back to an earlier stage of the 7 stages?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this is a schema. This is a schematic. It's basically the way you progress through the creative cycle. But obviously, you can break this mold, because frequently you'll get to the manipulation stage, for example, and you put ideas together and you realize, oh, I need more research. So you have to go back to the saturation
So
stage.
you'd loop back from the
manipulation
because something didn't work. You don't abandon it, but you can loop back and not start over with a new illumination, but go back and either re-examine what you've gathered or gather more.
Yeah, you can almost loop back at any stage. Sometimes you'll have the aha will not be the final aha that solves everything, but it'll be a solution to, oh, I know what skill I need to
so if
develop.
you got to manipulation and realize that you're missing a skill, you know what you're looking for. You go back with knowledge, and then you connect the dots and figure out, okay.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is useful about this is if you get stuck in the creative process, you can sort of stop, take a moment, say, okay, where am I in this cycle? And I'm stuck at this point. It probably means that you haven't done something earlier.
So you get to look back at the path you've gone and figure out, you know, the box that you said in an earlier segment, Twyla Tharp says she throws ideas into a box, and before you can think outside the box, what did she say? You have to
have a box in the first place.
Okay.
You know.
So the box that you created at that saturation stage, it's still got the things in it. You then go back and say, am I missing something, or do I not have enough? And then you can move through the next stages from there. Okay. I wonder if in that second look at the box, you would get another insight which would be richer than the first one.
That's the hope.
Okay.
You know, as you're going through,
Can you loop back at other stages? What if you got through to the verification and something fell apart?
Well, that's really the way creativity works, is that when you've completed a cycle, whether the verification tells you that it's been successful, if it says it's successful, usually what happens is that suggests a new challenge, a new idea.
If the implementation stage before verification, so you really are putting the prototype together, and if that is successful and you have actually verified it, then that particular cycle might seem to be at an end, but then what happens?
Well, if say you've invented the great new mousetrap,
yep.
You know,
or the iPod 2, then you start thinking of
then
iPod 3.
iPod 3, but also you might think of, how am I going to get it out to people? How am I going to, so then you have a marketing creative challenge, or how am I going to produce it?
Does this ever end?
It never ends, which is what is exciting, you know, which is what's
especially in brain health, if we have the large creative cycle for the magnificent product or wonderful idea that saves a lot of people's lives, or the smaller one. And we're going to take a break, and then I'm going to come back and challenge you to bring it back down to day to day. We'll be back.
Great.